Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, how the hard lessons we learned in 1982 could be applied to 2015's security breaches. Hacking for hire goes big, and then savage sentient cars that need new programming. Then it's a great big batch of your feedback, a rockin' roundup, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 218 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on June 4th, 2015. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, I'm glad you asked. That's powered by Scale Engine over at scaleengine.com. Seriously, go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Alan, I am looking forward to today's episode because I know it is just right before you head out to go to BSD Can.
Yes.
And I know when you get back, that means our episode's going to be, or the episode following that's going to be packed full of stories. And I get to watch your adventures at BSD Can and also Noah's adventures at Southeast Linux Fest. And I'm going to sit back, cry a little bit, and pour myself a drink and wait for you guys to return.
Yes, you know, if you had just got
my
your button
passport
gear, you could have came with me, but no.
So it turns out all those stories about passports taking a while are actually legit, and I should have paid attention.
Yeah.
You know what else I need to pay attention to? Apparently, and I didn't even know this, what's in my Tylenol? Tylenol, Ellen?
No. This is just an analogy that works.
All right, give it to me.
So anyway, the EFF has a great post talking about the current arguments about cybersecurity and the laws the government is trying to pass.
Yeah.
And so they mentioned the Tylenol murders from back in 1982, which is before I was even born.
Okay.
It's like the year you were born, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when a criminal started lacing Tylenol capsules with cyanide in 1982, Johnson & Johnson, the company that makes Tylenol, quickly sprang into action to ensure consumer safety. It increased its internal production controls to make sure it wasn't happening at the plant side, and recalled all the capsules and made new ones, and offered to exchange any tablets, even though people had already bought and weren't sure about them. You could just trade them and they would deal with it. And they said within 2 months of starting, they used triple seal tamper-resistant packaging and a bunch of stuff like that. The company focused on fixing the weak points in their supply chain that allowed someone to poison the pills instead of worrying about who did it. Right? And that way, it was impossible for anyone to interfere with the product before you bought it. You know, this story is taught in business schools as an example of how a company chose to be proactive in protecting its customers. The FDA passed regulations requiring security, and Congress ultimately passed an anti-tampering law, and that forced other companies to do it.
Yeah.
But these guys did it themselves first because it's their brand reputation. They want that medicine to be the one you can trust.
So is the equivalent
The focus on both of them, the private sector and the public sector, back in the 80s, was to ensure that consumers could get safe and secure access to their medication, rather than catching the one person that was poisoned a couple of bottles with cyanide.
Yeah.
Right? Indeed, the person who actually did the tampering was never caught. But that wasn't the important thing. They made it so that you couldn't tamper with the pills without it being obvious. And that solved the problem. You know, if only we could learn from examples like this in the case of internet security, or just security in general, instead of the crap that we deal with now.
So do you think, like, in terms of like Cisco or vendors should recall their products if they have a flaw?
Not maybe so much that. It's just that we need to spend more time worrying about how we can make people safe and less time worrying about blaming people. Or pointing our fingers at the Chinese.
Yeah.
Yes. Instead of pointing our fingers at the Chinese, we should be pointing our fingers at, well, you fell for a phishing scam. You should stop doing that.
Yeah.
And things of that nature, right? So say, to folks who understand computer security and networks, it's plain that the key problem is our vulnerable infrastructure and weak computer security. And it's, like the vulnerabilities in Johnson & Johnson's supply chain back in the 80s. And then the failure to secure our networks, the services we rely upon, and for individual companies, making it easy for bad actors to step in and poison our information, right? If the companies that had our private information, say like those 3 insurance companies we talked about last week, if they did a better job of protecting our data, we wouldn't be dealing with this problem right now, would we?
Right, correct.
So if we were to approach this as a safety problem, the way forward is clear. We need better incentives for companies to store our data and keep it secure. The fact is there are broad agreements that you could easily raise the bar against cyber thieves and spies. Known vulnerabilities frequently go unpatched, right? The New York Times reported that the JP Morgan hack happened because they had an unpatched server running in there, and it was a common known exploit that somebody just managed to use and get in. Information is too often stored in the clear rather than encrypted, and too often accidentally exposed to the internet. There's no excuse for any of that. And also, many devices like smartphones and tablets are increasingly store our entire lives on them, have all kinds of sensitive data, but don't get key security updates because, Samsung doesn't give a shit.
It's out of date. It's no longer the current product anymore.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there's a security vulnerability in our product, but what you should do is buy this better version of our product, not we should fix that for you.
Right.
Because it's not like there's something physically wrong with the hardware. They don't need to replace the device. It's a software update. It's not hard. Version control. They can maintain their new version and still write bug fixes for the old version. This has been a solved problem since the 70s.
Yeah.
But so the EFF's point is not only has Congress failed to address the need for increased computer and network security, key parts of the government are actually actively working to undermine our safety, right? The FBI continues to demonize strong cryptography, trying instead to sell the public on their technologically stupid strategy that will actually make us less safe.
Right.
Repeating the mistakes of the 90s that are coming back to bite us constantly.
Right.
We've seen that with Poodle and Freak. And what was the newest one?
The one that was specifically because of the export grade encryption requirements, right?
Well, there was two, right? There was the one that was Freak, right? Is the export grade, and then the second one was, or Poodle maybe. One of them was for export grade, and the second one was about the Henchmen ones. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
That one too.
Yep.
Equally outrageous, the recent logjam, that was the name, logjam vulnerability showed that the NSA has been spending billions of our tax dollars to exploit weaknesses in our computer security, weaknesses caused by the government's own ill-advised regulation in the 90s, rather than actually helping us solve the problem. So what can we do to actually solve the problem? We need to ensure that companies who we entrust our data to have clear, enforceable obligations to keep it safe from bad guys, right? We can't just say you have to encrypt it. We have to actually come up with standards that say, it has to be encrypted in this way, and the key is stored in this way, and only these people can access. Otherwise, it's like, oh, well, it's an unencrypted drive, but it was mounted on the server, so they hacked into the server, and it was mounted, so they could access it as if it wasn't encrypted, right? Not good enough.
Right.
Or it was encrypted, but we left the key laying around right beside it, and so they just stole both. But this includes who handles it directly and those who build the tools and that we use to store and otherwise handle our own data, right? In the case of Johnson & Johnson, product liability law made the company responsible for harm that comes due to behavior of others if safer designs were available and they just didn't use them. If the attack's foreseeable and the company knows that they have a way they could fix it, but they just don't, they're legally liable. But not so much in the computer, partly because the law and the court just don't understand the computer security stuff. Similarly, hotels and restaurants that open their doors to the public have obligations under the law for premises liability and take reasonable steps to keep you safe, even if the danger comes from other people, right? People who hold your physical stuff for you, the law calls them bailees. They have a responsibility to take reasonable steps to protect your belongings from being stolen or other external forces.
Yeah.
And why does that not apply to companies that have our data? In Canada, we have the Personal Information and Private Documents Act that, says, if a company's going to store your data, they have to store it in a locked room, and, only certain people only those who really need to are allowed to have access to the room and so on. But it's not quite new enough to extend to digital document storage. And too often it's all in a spreadsheet laying there on a Windows file share that everybody in the company can access. And somebody's going to accidentally reshare that, with their file sharing software or something ridiculous. I remember, what was it? Years ago on a very early TechSNAP, it was the routes the presidential limo was going to take or something got leaked over LimeWire because some contractor installed it on their machine and it reshared the entire network share over the internet.
Good memory, Alan.
Yeah. So anyway, going back to the EFF story, looking at the congressional debate, it's as if the answer for America's after the Tylenol incident was not to put tamper-evident seals, but to increase this security on the supply chain, but only to require Tylenol to share its list of customers with the government and with the folks at Bayer Aspirin, right? Like all the laws the government's trying to pass now about cybersecurity are just to allow companies to share data or force them to share data and to allow the FBI and the NSA to do more things.
And to indemnify those companies for doing it.
Yeah. So if we applied the current government logic to the 1982 case, Tylenol would have to give the government a list of everybody who's ever taken Tylenol and give that list to the aspirin company.
Yeah.
Instead of securing the supply chain and using tamper-evident seals on the pills. Okay? We wouldn't have stood for such wrong-headed response in 1982, and we shouldn't be standing for it now.
Yeah, but for some reason, I think because it's of a technical nature, we are.
Yeah, people just, that's hacker stuff. I don't understand it. Well, the government doesn't either, and you're just going to let them ride roughshod and just make a mess. So we got to stop this. So I have extra links. The usnews.com has a cybersecurity bill with the White House support may weaken both network security and privacy. And separately, PBS has a story on the that Tylenol thing. If you want to know more about that.
Yeah, that's a good reference. That's a good comparison.
But yeah, it's just they did a really good job of bringing that up and making the point. Like, if we applied the logic they used on that case now, we'd be good.
Yeah.
And if we applied the logic we're using now on that case, we'd be like, that's retarded because, hey, what we're trying to do now to solve it is not going to help.
Good one, Alan. Thank you for pointing that out. Let's take a moment and talk about IX Systems. Let's go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP right now, friends. Won't you go there and help support the TechSNAP program and check out what IX Systems has to offer? They, of course, have rigs built around those amazing Intel processors, free pre-purchase consultation, and it really is a great process with accurate quotes, on-time delivery, and they build those servers to meticulous quality with white glove post-purchase support. I love it.
That's the biggest thing I think is normally, if a company offers fast shipping, it's going to be something already built off the shelf and they're just going to put it in a box and send it to you. But IX is like, all right, we're going to custom build this machine for you. We're going to test it for 3 days and we're still going to get it to you by the time we promise.
Yeah, they are amazing.
And it's just like having the combination of custom built, tested, and guaranteed for me and still getting it as quickly as possible. It just makes a big difference to me.
Walt Disney World, Sony, Cox Communications, Adobe, Noah. I mean, these are just a couple of other customers.
For example, at Scale Engine, we just found out yesterday and even more today that we're going to need a lot more storage and we're going to need it soon. And it's like, okay, well, we need this very custom super storage server and we need it on exactly this date and we need it to arrive at a data center and with all the extra paperwork involved. And
you wouldn't even consider getting it somewhere else. You wouldn't get it anywhere else, no.
It's just, it wouldn't make sense to go anywhere else. They just wouldn't be able to handle our special requests.
And also, don't forget, they are, of course, also the folks that are behind the PCBSD project and Chris Moore over there. And version 10.1.2 is out. I like they're kind of positioning it as like those of you who are security conscious. That's a good positioning.
Yeah, Chris did a lot of really interesting work on that stuff. They have a thing now where your home directory can live on an encrypted USB stick. And, if you pop it out, then nobody else can access your files. But Chris built it partly for himself because he found every time he was going to a conference, he wanted to take all of his work with him. So if it just lived, he bought SanDisk makes an SSD that it's instead of a USB stick, it's actually like 128 gig SSD. So that's what his home directory lives on, and it's encrypted. And he just moves it between his desktop or his laptop or whatever machine he's using. But they also built another one. So they have a Tor mode, obviously, where you can just route all your traffic over Tor. But they also have another one where when you log in as the anonymous user, it does an encrypted. It creates a new encrypted file system. And immediately throws away the key and then puts your home directory on that. So all the things you do are written there, and as soon as you log out, when you unmount the encryption, the key's already been destroyed. There's no way to decrypt that data.
That's cool. That's neat.
You can do it has basically like your browser's private viewing mode, but for your whole home directory.
Yeah.
So everything you do gets erased when you log out.
Gosh, that is cool. And that's just some of the talent from the folks at IX Systems. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Go there, check them out, and support the TechSNAP program. Thank you, IX, for supporting the TechSNAP show. Hope you guys have a great conference. Alan, do you want to talk about this story regarding the IRS and the leaking of all of these records right around tax season, too? Oh, goody.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of touched on it, but didn't have the same level of detail when we talked about it with Krebs.
Yeah.
But yes, so the IRS reports that thieves stole tax data on over 100,000 people. In particular, sophisticated criminals used the online service run by the IRS to access personal tax information on more than 100,000 taxpayers. Part of an elaborate scheme to steal identities and claim fraudulent tax returns. So they used the Get Transcript feature on the IRS website. So the IRS is very specific, to be clear, that they weren't actually hacked.
Yeah.
What the attackers did is just went to the IRS website and logged in as all these different people and got their tax information and then used it to file fake returns. So in this case, the attackers already had all their personal information. They had your social security number, your date of birth, your address, and all the answers to the security questions that IRS is going to ask. Then they could just log in as you and get your last year's tax information.
Right.
Then they would just use that and just lower the withholding number by a big chunk and refile exactly the same tax return. So all the numbers and all the, like your employer, everything looks legitimate.
Yeah.
Except you get a big fat refund sent to the wrong place.
Sent to the right place for somebody.
Yeah. So yeah, the IRS is this is different than your regular compromise because they're actually using a legitimate service and they were only accessing accounts where they actually knew all the information about the person they were accessing.
Yeah, right.
So as far as the IRS system could tell, originally it looked like the real person logging in and just downloading their tax transcript. So the agency estimates that in 2013 alone, they paid out $5.8 billion in fraudulent tax returns. Which seems like a lot of money.
5.8 billion, not million.
Yeah.
Oof. Yikes.
And, if the thieves are doing 100,000 people at $8,000 a piece or whatever, that's adds up pretty quick.
Yeah.
They say the thieves tried to access over 200,000 accounts, but were only successful in about half of the cases because they didn't have maybe all the information. Or if you moved and they had your old address, they wouldn't be able to get in and so on. The IRS will notify all of those who had an attempt against their account. And in the case of those where they actually managed to get in and steal your tax transcript, the IRS will provide credit monitoring.
Good.
But those who are in the 100,000 that didn't get breached, but are going to get notified, they need to be especially careful because the IRS isn't giving them free credit monitoring, but the bad guys have at least most of their information already to have attempted it in the first place, right?
Jeez Louise.
So those people need to carefully monitor stuff themselves. As is most likely that the thieves already have most of your sensitive data and we're just missing one piece or something to have been successful against your account.
Yeah.
But this actually makes me wonder if this is actually a symptom of another breach. Did the attackers steal this data from somewhere else to get the SSNs and the addresses and the birth dates and then just use it against the IRS? Right? Because for a while there was speculation that it was one of the tax filing companies, the TurboTax or something.
Yeah.
Although that didn't seem to be the case, but it'd be interesting to see if there's any commonalities between the 200,000 people who are getting notified about this.
Yeah.
Which, was there one place that had the information on all of those people? And, can we find how the bad guys got the information on that many people? Because it seems like it was just more bulk than the regular identity theft type things.
I look at this kind of thing, a lot of times and I think, okay, what could have the general, consumer have done differently in this particular scenario? I don't really think, we couldn't say, boy, if you just would have done X, Y, Z, you wouldn't have had this issue. They went to do something to take care of their taxes. They went through a company that supposedly checked out and approved by the United States government.
Well, we don't know that it was a tax company that would cause the leak. It could have been anything. It could have been the health care providers that were behind this, right? That was lots of people's information that contains a lot of that same stuff. So we don't know how they got it. But we do wonder, they didn't specify whether this was them accessing existing accounts or if it was, you remember when we had the Krebs story, it was go sign up for the IRS's web service so that someone else can't sign up as you.
Yes, I do remember that.
And I wonder if maybe that's what this case was people signing up for the IRS account that weren't the real person.
Yeah.
And in those cases, maybe some people could have prevented this by having signed up ahead of time.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know you needed to do that, then that's not much you can do about it ahead of time or retroactively.
That could have been it. That could have been the saving grace, but who knows for sure.
Yeah. In the end, some of the blame should go on the IRS.
Yeah.
It seems that their online system doesn't have a very good intrusion detection system.
Yeah.
If it's a small set of IPs that are attempting to access 200,000 accounts, that should trigger some alarms. It's like if the same IP address is accessing more than a couple of accounts, you should wonder why. And especially if they were trying to access 200,000 accounts and 100,000 of those fails, that's a lot of if the same IP address is failing to log in a bunch of times, you should look into that. And if it's thousands of times, you should probably block them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, if the other thing is true, where people had to go create their accounts before somebody else could snag them, that also could be probably put on the IRS too for letting that setting the system up like that. That's pretty bad.
Right.
Gosh.
Well, at the same time, you don't want them to just bulk create everybody's accounts and mail your
No,
username and
it's true.
because that's. Like I said, in the Canadian version of the system, when you sign up, you can't use it for the first couple of weeks, and you have to get mailed an access code that you have to put in to prove it was you and a bunch of stuff.
That makes
sense.
sense.
Have some extra security into it.
Yeah. All right, Alan, are you ready for me to take a moment to talk about DigitalOcean?
Sure.
All right, well, let me mention DigitalOcean then. It's a place you should go check out if you listen to this show. They're perfect for you. If you need a back-end infrastructure for a project, if you need to do some development testing, or if you just want to learn, DigitalOcean is a great resource. It's a simple cloud hosting provider that's dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way for you to spin up your own cloud server. And they've really embraced a lot of ways for you to be able to get going fast. They have hourly pricing if you just want to do some testing, which is really slick. They also are really on board with container technology. So if you want to create something locally and develop it and then move it up to DigitalOcean Droplet for further testing and put it up on a public address, it's great for that. I mean, you can do it in minutes. In fact, you can get started in less than 55 seconds at DigitalOcean. That's incredible. And pricing plans start only $5 a month. That'll get you 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, because they're all SSD. And of course, when you get that, you also get one CPU and a terabyte of transfer. And DigitalOcean has data center locations all over the place. They got them in New York, they got them in San Fran, they got them in Singapore, Amsterdam, Germany. And the one in the Germany is super nice because it's got all of the connectivity to its neighbors. And
it's brand new and uses their fastest network connections.
40 gigabit EEC to each hypervisor, their fastest SSDs yet. Plus, then they're at that central transfer point right there. I mean, that is a great spot to set up a regional data center. And they've got them in London and as well. But really, what you're really going to notice once you become a DigitalOcean customer is the interface. And it's still to this day, after they've been a sponsor for a while, and I was actually a customer before they were a sponsor, I'm still impressed by this interface. It really is top-notch. You can create your droplets here. You get full DNS management. You can take snapshots, and from those snapshots, you can do templates, which is really cool. You can transfer snapshots to other DigitalOcean accounts. I like the snapshots to do templates. We just have a base rig. We templated that one time, and then we just build on top of that most of the time. And of course, beyond that, you've also got one-click installations for things like Ruby on Rails, Docker, GitLab, Ghost, WordPress. A lot of really good technology is just one-click installation away. Either one click of the application, or you can say, deploy the entire Ubuntu 14.04 stack with all of these things on there. And it's not some sort of hocus pocus. They just give you an Ubuntu rig with the software installed from the repos that you just update with the operating system updates. And by the way, DigitalOcean is hiring. They've asked me to mention it to you guys because they want to hire from the Jupiter Broadcasting audience because there's a good chance you're pretty savvy. So they're looking for all kinds of positions right now. So go over there and check it out. They have over... I think it was last time I looked. Here we go. Few openings. Yeah, here we go. Look at all these spots they have open. They have a bunch of spots open in engineering, including network administrator, software engineer, technical program manager. They're also looking for a technical writer, for a full-time technical writer to help with some of their tutorials because they have a lot of really great tutorials at DigitalOcean. And Alan, check this out. Check this out. They get free lunch every day at DigitalOcean, and they get gym reimbursement. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Man, listen, people at Jupiter Broadcasting, don't look at that. I can't compete. Go to DigitalOcean.com, but remember this important thing. You got to use our promo code SNAPOcean. SNAPOcean gives you a $10 credit. All right, that's nice. But really, more than $10, you're going to keep the TechSNAP program on the air for the long term. That lets DigitalOcean know that their sponsorship of the TechSNAP program was worth their time and money. So use the promo code SNAPOcean. You'll get a $10 credit. And the great thing about DigitalOcean is you can apply that to your account before you even add a credit card. I really like that. I have a separate PayPal account that I've had for a bajillion years that every now and then I'll throw a couple of dollars in that I use just for Steam games. Well, the Steam games never run my PayPal account down all the way to zero. And so as my DigitalOcean account gets a little low, I just toss a few coins into that, and it keeps it running because the value is insane. And we use the promo code SNAPOcean, you get the $10 credit. So a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Go to DigitalOcean.com, use the promo code SNAPOcean, and go create yourself a server. Free BSD, Core OS, and a bunch of other great operating systems available up on DigitalOcean.com. Alan, you said you set up a mail server? Is that what you said you set up recently?
Yes, I did.
BSD?
Yep. I had an older mail server, and it was just old. And well, there are two things. First, I've used 50 different server providers around the world, and DigitalOcean is still the nicest control panel.
I know,
there's
right?
one that's almost as good, but it's by far the nicest one.
Yeah.
The combination of looking nice, which I usually don't care about, but actually having all the functionality, being easy to use, and having all that functionality but making it easy to find.
Yeah.
A lot of the other ones, it's like, I can't quite find the piece I'm looking for.
It's very clear. It's not distracting, but it's not too watered down either. It doesn't feel like it's a dumbed down tool.
Yeah, it's not Fisher Price, but it's got everything you need.
If you wanted to, you could always dig into their API too. They have a pretty killer API.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the best part on top of it all, too.
DigitalOcean.com, and thank you guys. Go create yourself something and just play around, and that supports the show. You can do it 2 months for free. SnapOcean, DigitalOcean.com. I love it. Okay, so let's get into a crime as a service. Now, this to me sounds like a money maker, but Alan, I guess maybe as more people do it, the market responds and how much it's willing to pay. What's going on?
So this is Cybercrime Service Economy is a story over at fastcompany.com. And it says, in 2013, a pair of private investigators in the Bay Area embarked on a fairly run-of-the-mill case surrounding poached employees. But according to a federal indictment that was unsealed in February, their tactics sounded less like a California noir and something more like sci-fi. In order to spy on their clients' adversaries, the prosecutors say they hired a pair of hackers from the internet. So Nathan Moser and Peter Suguaris were working on behalf of an internet marketing company called Visalis to investigate a competitor which Visalis had sued for poaching some of their former employees. Next, the government alleges that Moser and Sugusa, a retired 28-year veteran of the San Francisco Police Department, recruited two hackers to break into the email and Skype accounts of the competing firm. To cover their tracks, the communication was done by leaving messages in the draft folder of a Gmail account rather than actually sending emails.
That's what David Petraeus did, too.
Yep. Funny, the Gmail account was krowtn.a.lortnoc, which, if you actually read it backwards, spells control and network at gmail.com.
Yeah, good one. That seems to be a kind of a popular methodology for passing communications back and forth, is a shared Gmail account, storing the messages in drafts.
I forget which intelligence agency first came up with that.
I thought that was the CIA.
Hotmail. I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
But it was done at Hotmail a couple other places as well, yes. The California case sheds light on a burgeoning cybercrime market where freelancers hack both on public forums and on the black market, cater to everyone from cheating students to zealous boyfriends to law firms and executives. Some call it espionage as a service, but really it's just, thug for hire, crime as a service type thing.
Yeah.
While it's difficult to verify the legitimacy and the quality of hackers posting on dozens of online exchanges that the Fast Company examined, some sites boast an eBay-like feedback mechanism that lets users vouch for a reliable seller and warn each other of scams. One of the researchers describes a range of expertise from amateur teenagers wielding off-the-shelf spyware that could charge you a couple $100s for a single operation to sophisticated industrial espionage services that make tens of thousands of dollars and or more on smuggling intellectual property across international borders. He says the threat landscape is very complex. A hacker group will sell to whoever wants to pay them. At one of the forums they looked at, Hackers List, For instance, hackers bid on projects in a manner similar to contract work sites like Elance. So this is a reverse thing.
Yeah.
You post a job and
Right.
hackers bid on it. And
Look
you
at that.
pick one.
Look at this.
Those in the
wow.
market for hackers can post jobs for free and or pay extra to have their listing show up at the top of the site and be highlighted. Hackers generally pay $3 each to bid on the projects, and then the users are charged for sending messages back and forth. The site also provides an escrow service so that the hackers don't get paid until they actually do the work.
Nice.
Of course, the first question is how much do you trust a site to hold your money if it's selling illegal services?
Yeah.
Sounds like a Bitcoin bank, but
Right.
less trustworthy.
Or Silk Road. Silk Road worked kind of like this too, with an escrow and all that. And then you would,
Yeah. So in a report released in March, Europol, the European Union's law enforcement arm, predicted online networking sites and anonymous cash transfer mechanisms like cryptocurrencies will continue to contribute to the growth of crime as a service to criminals who can work on a freelance basis facilitated by social networking online and its ability to provide a relatively secure environment to easily and anonymously communicate.
Yeah.
Of course, they say the environment isn't always that secure. Earlier this month, one security researcher unmasked the apparent owner of Hackers List and gave his name. Said he Denver-based security expert. Soon after, the Stanford legal scholar crawled the site's data, revealing the identity of thousands of the site's visitors and their requests for hacks. So it found all the people that were asking for stuff. The researcher found 21 satisfied requests, including one that said, I need to hack a Facebook account of my girlfriend, which he paid $90 for. Another one where it says, I need access to a specific Gmail account, which was $350. And another one where I need a database hacked because I need it for doxing, which was, again, $350. And a majority of the requests for service involved Facebook for 23% of the projects, Google for 14%, and were usually sparked by a business dispute, a jilted romance, or a desire to artificially improve their grades, with targets including the University of California, University of Connecticut, and the City College of New York. The Dell researchers, here's that graphic I was talking about. The Dell researchers have year-over-year statistics looking at in the past how much some of these services cost and how much they cost now, and see that things like denial of service attacks are getting cheaper as there are more people selling them.
Yeah, boy, going down quite a bit, it looks like.
Yep.
$1 to $30 for a hacking tutorial. Denial of service attack is in 2013. Price per hour is $3 to $5. In 2014, it's still $3 to $5.
But that's for hourly. If you look at the weekly one, it's gone down a couple $100.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it has. And doxing has gone. Doxing has been. Yeah. Whoa. And cryptors. That's new. I like that. They got a new.
Yes, that's something new.
Hacking tutorials they weren't tracking in 2013 either.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I expect more of the serious hacking forums, like the ones that targeting, industrial espionage and so on, will go further underground and be harder to find and more exclusive about who they let on the site. And we'll find more of these obvious ones, where it's a bunch of teenagers and so on. And those ones, as they become more popular, will likely be infiltrated by researchers like Krebs, although Krebs is good at getting all the way down to the bottom of that stuff. But also, journalists, but also law enforcement.
Yeah.
And very soon, they'll be arresting a bunch of the people that are posting, I'll pay $90 to hack into somebody's Facebook account. But the other one is I expect to see a lot of scams. One guy can pretend to be a bunch of hackers, post this up, and get a bunch of people to pay $400 for hacked Facebook accounts, and then just pocket the money and disappear.
Or he'll be able to do it at scale. He'll be able to do these things at scale and just,
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, but if the scam part is more you pay money, you don't get anything.
Yeah.
And you can't exactly go and complain to the police.
Go report him to the Better Business Bureau.
Yeah, I paid this guy to hack something for me, and he just took my money.
Yeah. That's not going to happen.
And then over at webpolicy.org, they have some more information on the hacker marketplace. And I do recommend you read the whole Fast Company thing, because they have a lot more research. They dug into a lot of this.
A very interesting scene, the Walmart of hackers out there, Alan. Go get yourself something, a nice cheap product. Good one, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
Nope, that's about it for that one.
All right, well, then I'm going to just take a moment, if I could, and rock your face with some knowledge about Ting. Go to techsnap.ting.com to get a $50 service credit. It's only going to be good until the end of June. $50 service credit or $50 off your first Ting device. Now, why Ting? Ting is perfect for our audience. It's mobile that makes sense. And so if you're smart, you're analytical, you'll realize that mobile companies are making you pay for a whole bunch of stuff you're not using. You know, those minutes, the messages, and the megabytes. You have to kind of best guess, don't you? So I'm not going to make a lot of calls. So I probably need about 400 minutes, maybe 500 minutes, just in case. I don't do a lot of texting because I have Telegram, but I might have something that alerts me. I might have somebody that starts robo-texting me. So I got to have some buffer in there. So I better have 200 text messages. But of course, their smallest text message plan is 500, and that's $13 a month. But okay, fine, I'll get that. And then I know I use at least 2 gigabytes of data a month, but maybe I'm going to have a busy month, so I might need to have 4. So I better get the 4 gig data plan. But 4 gigs isn't maybe enough. So, you know, like you have to do this sort of ridiculous dance. It doesn't make any sense, and you know that. That's where Ting comes in. You just pay for what you use. Ting just takes your minutes, your messages, your megabytes, whatever you use, that's all you have to pay. It's a flat $6 for the line. And they just add up your usage, and you pay that. It really makes sense. And then if you have any troubles, you get to speak with a human being. And look at all of the great devices at Ting. So starting at the real value end, $60 for the Kyocera Kona feature phone. That's a great deal. You also have the Hawaii U3900, a little bit more expensive, $81, but now you're getting something that has a little bit better battery life, a little bit better screen, and a camera. This is a great phone because remember, all of these are off contract, and you're only paying for what you use. So this is like you could stick this in the car, give it to a kid, a family member for an emergency phone. And then if you need something with a little more oomph, they've got the Moto G for $91, unlocked, off contract. You own it outright. The Samsung Nexus S, that's super cheap over there. You can also pick up the new Blue Studio Mini, a really nice quad-core Android phone for $111, or the Netgear Zing, a $6 MiFi hotspot after you pay that initial purchase price. So many awesome devices over at Ting now. Look at the Moto E. Just added. And of course, they also just added the Samsung Galaxy S6 and S6 Edge. And the real screamer in value, the Blue Studio 6.0 LTE for $185 from Ting. Go to techsnap.ting.com, bring your own device. You probably got a compatible device. And if you don't, then you can get a great discount when you go to techsnap.ting.com and support this show. Now, I don't normally do app picks on the TechSNAP program. I save those for the Linux Action Show. But this one is applicable to any of you who've switched to Ting after seeing our ads. This one's going to be really great for you, and this is one of the ways I manage my Ting account, so I want to tell you about this. Kyra's here with our TechSNAP app pick of the week.
This week, the Ting app is the Ting app of the week. It's also meta. I'm Kyra, and this is the Ting app of the week. At Ting, we pride ourselves on giving you the tools to take control of your cell phone bill. Practically anything you do in your Ting account dashboard on a computer can be done inside the Ting mobile app. The usage panel shows how many minutes, messages, and megabytes your account and all your devices have used. Tap a number to check out recent activity on that device. Tap again for detailed event info. Easily enable or disable device settings, like international calling, internet access, and picture messaging. You can view your current bill and detailed billing history, and set alerts and caps to keep things under control. You can also give us a call, access our help site, or submit a help request right through the app. You can also stay up to date on the latest Ting news by hitting the blog. You could even watch this episode of the App of the Week featuring the Ting app on the blog within the Ting app. Just be careful not to create a glitch in the matrix.
That was good.
The Ting app is available on Android and iOS devices and is free. You'll find links to the Ting app below, or just search Ting in the Google Play or the App Store. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I actually really like the Ting app, and I can't think of any time I've ever said that about a carrier's app. You know, I've used the other apps that some of the other carriers put out there, and they're usually like, they'll spam me about like some sports game I can watch on my phone or some new sale they have. The Ting app is really a useful app. All of the Ting service, it just works so well. Start by going to techsnap.ting.com.
Well, if we're on the topic of app picks, I have one for your phone.
Yeah?
Hurricane Electric, the people that do the free IPv6 tunnel broker and stuff.
Yeah. They
have an app for anybody who does anything with networking. It is great. Let me just pull it up here. It has like all the network diagnostic tools you could ever need bundled into your phone.
Ooh.
Here it is. It's called Network Tools by Hurricane Electric.
Okay.
And you get an ARP thing, a Bonjour browser, device manager, DNS tools, interface information, iPerf 2 and iPerf 3 for testing network performance, Mac browser, a ping sweep, progressive trace route, an SSL and TLS analyzer, TCP port scan, trace route, whois, all the network tools you could ever need built into an app on your phone.
I'm going to get it right now, Alan. Cool. Hurricane Electric makes it, huh? Very nice.
Yeah. They're the ISP I have here at my house.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So there you go, and that makes your Ting device a network admin tool. TechSNAP.ting.com. I love it. Yeah, I've also got some killer Wi-Fi analyzers that have been extremely useful for figuring out where all of that interference is coming from and what channels are more.
Yeah, or which channels not busy. And I remember John whipped that out at Linux Fest last year.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. So there's a lot of apps to turn that into a utility belt. All right, Alan, well, guess what? We're all done with the top news stories, so that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. Last year, I think is how you say his name, writes our first email today. And guess what, Alan? Shocker. ZFS question. He says, hello, Alan and Chris. Historically, my storage solution has been to collect all of the unwanted PCs I can get my hands on, rip out the hard drives, stuff it into my Linux machine, and let each drive serve a specific storage need. Video, audio backup, etc. A couple years back, however, the number of drives I have surpassed the specific storage task I have. Combine this with the fact that my audiobook drive was mostly empty while my videos drive was ready to warp its mother mounting bracket. And I added that part. And just made sense to bite the bullet and use LVM and put all of the disks into one storage space. Needless to say, I'm biting my nails whenever I look at the days without a hard drive failure number on the chalkboard. My current plan is to move to a ZFS drive pool. Aside from knowing that this is a thing that I could do, I have no idea if this makes sense for my situation because I'm dealing with a wide variety of drive sizes from 4 terabytes down to 120 gigabytes and even 3 gigabytes when I'm feeling silly. It will make sense to divide all of my disks into 120 gigabyte chunks and let mirroring spaghetti ensue. Or is there a better solution here at my 2.7 minutes of research that has failed to reveal? Also, how terrible is it the recovery process like this for this kind of setup? Thanks. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, so the biggest problem is in ZFS, you can just do striping and just attach all those drives individually and get all of the space. The problem is if any one drive dies, every file is gone.
Yeah, and that's kind of what he's got right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what his problem with his LLVM is.
Yep.
So my very first thing is I really do not mean to sound like a snob or prudish or something, but if you really care about your files, don't use 8 or 10-year-old tiny hard drives.
Yep.
No, but at the same time, I understand. I had it. My first ZFS server was actually something kind of like this, partly because it wasn't that I was using old hard drives or anything, but I just kept adding more drives, and the newer drives were always bigger because that was the biggest drive you could buy at the time. So I had like 2 320 gig drives, and then 2 500 gig drives, and then 2 1.5 terabyte drives, and so on. So in order to deal with what he's got here, what I recommend is pairing the drives off into mirrors. So find the drives that are closest in size. So if you have 2 120 gig drives, then that's one mirror. And then you have a 320 and a 500 gig drive. That's another mirror. You only get 320 out of it, but close enough. And the main advantage to doing sets of mirrors like that is as long as one of the 2 drives survives, you'll still be okay. And whereas if you tried to put all the drives into bigger sets of mirrors or something, you wouldn't get as much of the space, right? If you put like a 4 terabyte drive and a 120 gig drive together, you only get 120 gigs. And so on. But I definitely don't recommend trying to slice it up into a bunch of 120 gig chunks and do that. It's just ZFS kind of expects each one to be a real disk. And so then when you're writing to 2 different disks in ZFS, but it's actually both ending up on the same spinning disk, you're going to unstabilize all the performance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Plus, if you lose one drive, you're going to take out all the 120 gig chunks that are on it.
Yeah.
And ZFS isn't going to know that.
Yeah.
Whereas if it knows it, it'll purposely start spreading stuff out and be like, okay, you need to store this thing in 2 places. This is important metadata. I'll make sure it goes on 2 physically different hard drives. It can't do that if it doesn't know where the physical hard drives are.
Great point.
So I would group your disks up into the best matching pairs you can to waste as little space as you can.
Yeah.
And then use that. The other advantage to mirrors like that is it's easier to add and remove stuff. So, if you have your 220 gig drives in a mirror and you decide that you now have 2 bigger drives and you're out of slots, you remove one, or you add the one bigger drive to that mirror, so you now have 3 disks in the mirror. And once the big drive has enough, you can remove the smaller drives one at a time and replace them, and basically in steps swap out the 220 gig drives for 2 brand new 4 terabyte drives, and now your whole pool gets bigger by the 4 terabytes minus 120 gigs.
Yeah.
So mirrors just give you that much more flexibility, while at the same time still giving you the redundancy.
It's brilliant.
I highly recommend against ever having no redundancy, and I also recommend against trying to divide it up into a bunch of 120 gig chunks to get that little bit, eke out that little bit extra storage out of your collection of old hard drives.
Yeah. Great answer.
The downside to what we call unbalanced LUNs in ZFS, where if you have a mirror that's 2 4 terabyte drives and 2 120 gig drives, is ZFS is going to split up the writes to them so that both mirrors will get full at the same time. So if you write 100 megabytes of data, most 90% of it's going to end up on the 4 terabyte drive and only 10% on the 120 gigabyte drives. So then when you read it, you're not going to get the full mirroring speed you would get of reading half the file from each of the 2 sets of drives. And so, unlike some other solutions like LVM, where it might actually try to evenly write to all the drives and then those ones are full and we'll just not use them later on.
Yeah.
It'll try to balance them out.
Right.
And
right.
in doing so, you just won't get as much performance as you would have gotten if you had more reasonably sized drives.
That's a good heads up.
So you can mix drive sizes, just don't mix them in the same VDEV, and always use mirrors.
Yeah. Great answer. All right, so Tyler writes in.
I know it's compelling to use old hard drives, but
well, don't we all
honestly,
want to?
If I'm using a bunch of old hard drives, I would use at least 3 deep mirrors. So I'd group it in at least 3 drives for every mirror, so that even if 2 of them die, each mirror is still intact.
What about
because if they're old, I don't trust them.
What about not using them in a ZFS array at all? You save that for your real data, and then just go buy a couple old used Drobos off eBay and just throw the old drives in that thing. I know you would hate that. I know.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to Tyler's email. Tyler writes in. He says, "Hello, Chris and Alan. I'm a longtime listener. I need some advice about honeypots. I know I have heard of them mentioned before in the podcast, but I'm not sure how to implement one. My boss wants me to set up a honeypot on our network to go along with our IDS. I'm having some problems finding information on the best way to set one up. So far, I have honeyD installed on a Linux server, but I'm not sure how to configure it. I would like to have honeyD emulate, if that's even the right terminology, a Windows 2008 R2 or 2012 server and some Linux appliances, which makes up the bulk of our network. If you could point me to a resource to get this set up, it would be really appreciated. The ones I'm finding seem really out of date. Thanks for the great show, Tyler."
I don't actually. I've never set one up, so I don't know. I looked at one piece of software called La Brea or something like that, because it was Tarpit, back in the past, because I was trying to add extra hops to a trace route just for vanity, really.
Yeah.
And that was the extent of what I looked at.
I know of one that is met. I know of one that's built. Oh boy! Actually, now that I think about it, okay. So there's a couple I know of. The one that I know of is called Honey Drive, and it's created by the folks that make some other exploit and penetration testing stuff. And so Honey Drive is based on Ubuntu 12.04 LTS, and it contains up to 10 pre-installed and pre-configured honeypot software packages, such as like an SSH honeypot, a ghost web fingerprint thing. I'm not totally familiar with all of the software comes out of the, but the nice thing about it is it's using some of that company's included technology, like their KIP graph, to actually give you graphs and reports of the honeypot stuff. So then, because what do you do with the data if you do get somebody knocking on your door? They include the analysis for that, and it comes with sort of a GUI that you could load up on a machine and just play around with it and stuff to kind of learn it. So, and I know also, Alan, that there are some VMware appliances out there that are specifically messed up and ready to be abused. And I've used those in some show testing before. So there are a few out there. There's also Stratagem. Another Linux Honeypot distribution, but it hasn't been updated for a while. So based on, again, Ubuntu.
Yeah, I think most of the higher end ones are pretty commercial now, and that's yeah. Generally the basic idea with the Honeypot is you leave it hanging out there and let it, for example, have it accept SSH connections no matter what username and password you put in, and then if somebody retries it, then if they actually try to run a command or something when they connect, then you just blacklist their IP and don't let them connect to anything. So if nobody knows the IP of this machine, no one's going to randomly try to SSH into it. Everybody who tries should just be blocked.
Yeah, I think he needs to check out HoneyDrive. That's the one he needs to go with.
The advantage to the Honeypot idea is you actually see the command with the username and password they're going to try, and the command they're going to try to run when it works, so that you have a better idea of what they're trying to do.
You know how compromised you are. Are they really trying your legit stuff?
Well, yeah. You can find out if they're really trying to do, but also what commands are they going to try to run, so that you can be like, oh, I'm going to add a rule to our intrusion detection system that says, hey, if anybody, tripwire or something, if anybody tries to run this command, nuke it. Or,
now,
drop the session.
There's a lot of... I would also do some reading on how to properly implement honeypots, because there's a lot of different philosophies. You can use them as just sort of a catch-all to see, are we even being banged on? I don't think that's a very valid use of them, because everybody gets knocked on. That's the way script kiddies work. There are other ways you can use them where you can get people to go in certain directions in your network and things like that. So Tyler, read up on some of that stuff. And also, there are some talks from conferences on YouTube. I don't know how you've been doing your Googling, but search around on YouTube for some talks and demonstrations, and I think that's probably going to be your best time spent for that topic.
But yeah, basically, if you can have a VM or whatever that's laying around inside your network, not accessible from the internet at all, and then you're just basically leaving it out there, making it an obvious choice. So someone's inside your network and they do a scan or something, and they'll go for it first. Yeah. And as soon as you detect somebody actually doing something on it, you can A, that somebody's inside your network, and B, you can try to lock it down quickly.
Yep. There you go. All right, Kyle writes in with a Postgres question. He says, hi, Chris and Alan. A developer friend of mine is looking to deploy Postgres SQL and Ruby on Rails on Red Hat Enterprise 6.6 server using Docker in order to handle the backend for his web app that will be put into production in the near future. I heard about his plan, and immediately alarm bells started going off in my head. Because of the many security problems that have been discovered in the Docker platform recently. That being said, my friend has no option regarding the server OS, sorry on my Canadian brother, and therefore wants to use containers. I guess he's not a big RHEL 6.6 fan. He says he's not familiar with Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Given these requirements, what are the best practices he can follow to minimize security vulnerabilities in this deployment? Would a VM be a better choice, or is there some kind of other Linux container option that might be more secure? Thanks for the great show. I listen every week, even though system administration isn't my thing. Kyle.
A VM might actually be a better option than a Docker, although with it being an SQL database, you probably get better performance from the Docker.
Yeah. Hey, what about this? Don't run Postgres as root. I mean, that's going to be a huge part of it right there.
Yes, obviously.
And then, what his developer friend can do is if he keeps a copy of the Docker container as the master container on his machine, and he keeps it patched and then uploads it to the hub, and the people that have it deployed check out the new version from the hub and keep it patched, it's just as secure as any Ubuntu machine if you basically follow rules like don't run things as root and keep it patched. The problem is most people use containers as an excuse to no longer have to worry about security patches. Well, the host machine is getting patched and all of the stuff around me is getting patched, but my little Ubuntu world on this Red Hat box is never getting touched. And that is a problem. And that's what you want to avoid, I think, with Docker. I think that's going to be the long-term problem with Docker. A lot of these other little problems are going to get patched out with system updates over time. And I think the key thing is just don't use root.
Yeah. Because really the vulnerability you have with Docker is someone will manage to get a shell inside the Docker because of a flaw in the Ruby on Rails code or so. It's something you wrote, probably, or maybe something in one of the apps you use or whatever. And then once they're in the Docker, they'll be able to somehow break out into the host. That's really where most of the problems in Docker lie, are that various ways of breaking out into the host or accessing the host file system and doing stuff. Like I think they could overwrite the etc shadow file at one point because if you're root in the Docker, you are UID 0. And if you could mount the root file system, you could then read or write to the shadow file. And if you could write to it, then you could change the root password and then just SSH to the host and log in with the root password that you now know. Or even if they disable the root login, if you have access to /etc, you can edit the SSHD config and change it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's really going to be your best step.
So
And
in
he
general,
shouldn't need
yeah,
it for a database.
Biggest thing, keep it. Yeah, the database won't need it. If anything, it'll be the Ruby on Rails, and again, it shouldn't need it either.
Yeah.
You'd be running it under Nginx and Passenger or whatever you're going to be doing. So it should be okay. It's too bad you're stuck with Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
Yeah.
Especially since you don't know it, which makes causes that much more concern.
Yep.
But
go use our DigitalOcean promo code.
Right. If you probably have the same problem if I told you to use BSD in jail, right? If you don't know them, you can make the same mistake.
That is the issue. All right. Landon writes in from Nashville. He says, let me start off by saying I am a live audio engineer by trade, but it's amazing how quickly the field has become more like an IT job. And the subject is backup paranoia melts my face off. I've been watching Last for years and have been quietly watching TechSNAP since episode 1. It's amazing how much you realize you need to learn when you almost have 100 devices on a local network together, over 300 feet of home-run Cat5e cable, and of course you got segmentation, switch hops, network taps, packet sniffing, not to mention working around Wi-Fi complications at large-scale arenas. Maybe we can talk about all that another day. My main headache right now comes from a few data migrations and paranoia for data loss that I have developed over the last couple of years. He says, you're not going to point my fingers where that came from. I have a FreeNAS rig that I've been running since 2009 on different hardware over the years. To shorten the story, when I switched to ZFS, I had to offload all the data onto a Drobo. And I was getting a Drobo and an external hard drive, so I had 2 copies. Oh, good. Then I started playing with Windows Home Server 2011 while I was getting the hardware together for my new FreeNAS. Now I have 3 different copies of my data in different levels of sync, not knowing what is where, and to add to the complication of an external RAID 1 I carry and I travel with. Now, do you suggest I merge all of this data and create one master copy without duplicates and go forward after that with my traveling external drive and LAN servers when I get home? I feel like I'm drowning in duplicates of my own data. What software do I need to compare files on FreeNAS, Windows Home Server 2011, and my external drives to dig myself out of this hole? How would you suggest getting out of this without losing danger? Any help would be amazing. Wow. Multiple copies of pictures, music.
The biggest problem is, having a backup is one thing. Having a copy that diverges is a different thing, right? So if you have the same data and you copy it and you have it on 2 different drives and you only ever upgrade on the first drive, it's easy to keep the second drive in sync by just copying things over. The problem is if you have your home server and you update stuff when you're at home, but then you take the backup with you on the road and update it there, now one file is newer on the first drive and one file is newer on the second drive, and you have to try to reintegrate them. And that's where, trouble happens. rsync has quite a few options for this. There's a flag where you can say, don't update. So I'm copying everything from the NAS to the external drive, but if the file on the external drive is newer, don't overwrite it. That helps in most cases, although your problem can be if you've updated the file in 2 places. If it's, depending on the type of file, it's like an Excel document, you have to manually figure out or copy the changes from this one and the changes to that one and make a new file. You can get all kinds of complicated. But yeah, rsync probably is the easiest way. You just have to read the documentation on it and make sure you use the right flag so that you say, don't overwrite a file if the destination file is newer than the source file. And so that'll let you copy everything from the NAS to the external drive, skipping anything that hasn't changed and copying everything that has. And if the copy on this drive is newer, it won't get overwritten. Then you have to then do the rsync in the reverse, copying. That way you'll only copy the files that are newer that you just didn't overwrite back to the FreeNAS. And and then you'll have to repeat that process if either has changed over the course of the way it was running, which could have taken a day.
But rsync does seem like your safest bet when you're moving a lot of little files and stuff like that.
And also, first, take a snapshot on the FreeNAS, so if a file does accidentally get overwritten, you can get it back.
That's a pretty good solution, Alan. I wasn't sure what angle to take with this, and I like that. That's good. Because rsync does a lot of all of that for you. So it's
but if you can, you'd want to keep your actual backup as read-only. So one thing that we've talked about doing in the ZFS book, I think it was in that ZFS book. If not, it'll be in the second one when it comes out. I don't remember if it got cut first because the first book was already full. But if you're using mirrors or whatever in your FreeNAS, you can actually make the mirror even deeper. So you can basically add an external drive as an extra member of a mirror, and then you can just offline it and put it in a cupboard or somewhere safe, even in a different building or whatever, in case the house catches fire. Then later you bring it back and connect it again, and ZFS will be like, okay, you're just missing this last 3 weeks of changes, and it'll just sync it back up, and then you take it offline again. And you can do that with multiple drives, right? So you can have, once a week you bring out one of the drives, and you end up with a month-long rotation, so that you have a snapshot of what your file server looked like from each week for the last month in cold storage somewhere off-site. And that can be a cool way to do it.
Yeah, it really is.
But obviously with ZFS, if you change that drive, you cannot reattach it to the mirror and catch it back up.
Yeah.
And that's why you want to, But basically, that's the big difference between a backup and a copy. In a backup, you want to have multiple points in time, and the backup is read-only. Whereas when you have a copy, that's when you can get into the problem of, it's diverged, and now I have changes on both sides that I have to reintegrate.
Mm-hmm. All right. There you go. If you'd like to get your question answered on the show, email it to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com. Or guess what? We have a super handy contact link. You just use that, choose TechSNAP from the drop-down, and the monkeys will send it into our inbox for a future episode. Or we've got that subreddit, TechSNAP.reddit.com. Send your questions in. They don't always have to be about storage, but we do particularly like them because I know a lot of you out there are noodling around. Even if you don't have a problem now, you got to be like me thinking, what am I going to do on my next storage build? So it's always great to hear all these different ideas that people are kicking around. But we answer all kinds of sysadmin-related questions. Just send them in to us, TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com. But now, with the emails all done, it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's that crazy music means. Now, the roundup of stories that just didn't fit at the top of the show, but we wanted to give you some links to read up on your own, and a lot of these links came from our great subreddit over at TechSNAP.reddit.com. First one's making big news today. I just saw it at the top of a couple of news sites before we started. The NSA's hacking surveillance powers were greatly expanded in 2012 by the Obama administration, according to new Edward Snowden leaks. Now, these are specifically authorizations that allow them to monitor what could be suspicious hacking activity, either domestically or remotely. And now the idea would be that they would be something from the U.S. going outward, or something from the outward coming into the U.S. But when you actually dig into it, it also looks like it runs into some surveillance of domestic use, including ones that involve law enforcement and things like that. What do you think, Alan? Surprised at all?
Nope.
Yeah, I know. So how'd they pull it off? Good question, Alan. They broke into internet cables without a warrant on American soil. In some cases without knowledge of the companies, in other cases with knowledge of the companies. And they also deployed equipment with malware.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Cisco, for some of its customers they didn't really name, maybe level 3 or something, they fake drop ship it to empty warehouses and stuff so that NSA won't intercept it and fill it with spyware.
You better believe it. I've been watching this for years. Robotic surgery is coming, and hospitals are now testing leg time for robotic surgery 1,200 miles away. And I've seen some of the early days testing of this stuff, and it is amazing.
Mm-hmm. And so basically, before the most they'd ever done is from like a different room in the hospital. So you're talking, under 5 or 10 milliseconds of latency. They were like, well, what's it actually going to be like if we do it from further away? So they did use something like FreeBSD's DummyNet to simulate a slower network. So they dialed up the latency to 200 milliseconds. And at that point, basically because of human perception and so on, the doctors didn't notice, right? Because, trying to conceptualize 200 milliseconds is just too fast.
Yeah.
When they went to 300 to 500 milliseconds, they said it gets a little rough. If it's just a burst of lag, the doctors find that they'll just automatically wait a second for it to dissipate and then go and continue. But pretty much everybody found that after 600 milliseconds of latency, it just gets uncomfortable with trying to do surgery.
So I'm good with 200. I think I'm going to stick with in the green there.
Well, with 200 milliseconds, that's still enough to go from anywhere in the U.S. to anywhere in Europe.
Yeah.
And even the 300 milliseconds is, you could still get to Singapore and back. Right? So you should be able to go pretty much anywhere without having too much trouble.
Wonder if they could use that. It could be interesting to see what they can do with it.
Yeah, like current latency from my house to Singapore is 235 milliseconds.
Boy, and you thought
pretty much in the acceptable range.
You thought gamers hated lag. Well, there's going to be a whole new generation of people that hate lag, Alan.
Like, can you get all the patients at the hospital stop Netflixing? I'm trying to do surgery in here.
All right, let's talk about this story. This is too funny. An underground project has emerged after a bank staff accidentally emailed details about it to The Guardian, including PR notes on how to deny its existence altogether.
Yes. So not just any bank, the Bank of England.
Yes.
Accidentally sent its top secret Brexit plan, where they will exit the EU, to the newspaper.
Oops.
And including, like you said, details on how they would deny its existence if it ever got hinted at. And it's like, well, it's hard to do that when I have your plan along with your plan on how to deny your plan.
Yeah, that's a bad one, Alan. That's a bad one.
Yeah.
All right, we have an article from Full Disclosure, or seclist.org. We have a hardware clock privilege escalation bug. The hardware clock? What?
Yeah, so there's the hardware clock utility on Linux machines.
Sure.
And in the man pages and the source code, it talks about how it's not a big deal if you need to set UID so that users can pull the clock time directly from the hardware. Except for it really is a big deal because it ends up running the date command, apparently. So because the user controls the environment, if you're an unprivileged user and you have access to a system where they have the HW clock command as setuid, which I don't remember if it said which distros do, then if you set your path environment variable to, say, /tmp, and then in there you can create a shell script called date that then, CH owns your exploit to run as, or a shell or whatever program you want to be setuid root. Then basically when the hardware clock tries to run the date command, it will find your date shell script instead of the real date command because it's first in the path, and it'll run it with a bunch of parameters, which will be ignored. And as root, your shell script will then chown and make setuid either a shell for you or the exploit you want to run. And now whatever code you decided is now run as root.
Looks like it affects Debian and Debian-based derivatives such as Ubuntu. So a good portion of Linux rigs.
Yep. And they have a nice proof of concept. It's a couple of lines and shows you how you can, as a regular user, run any command you want as root.
Love it. Love it. Hey, Alan, are you excited about Windows 10? We got the pre-release versions specs here. You're going to need 1 gigahertz.
When I saw the title of the article, which is a list of things that are going to be removed as you upgrade from Windows 7 or 8, I was like, oh my God, how horrible is it going to be?
Yeah.
But it's not too terrible.
No.
Support for floppy drives is gone, even USB ones. You'll have to get the drivers from Windows Update or the provider or the hardware manufacturer instead of them being included. One of the big ones, though, is DVD playback. You won't be able to play a DVD directly in Windows Media Player. You'll have to download something like VLC or have a pay for a DVD decoder. Mm-hmm. They're also going to remove Solitaire and Minesweeper.
No!
They'll be available as separate downloads instead. There was another big one now. Anyway, there's a whole list on that article there. Luckily, they have a list of programs they know don't work.
They're taking away gadgets.
Yeah. And a couple of things. Oh, one of the other big things is Windows 10 non-pro editions. You won't have the option to not install Windows updates.
Oh my God, that is it. Yeah, only Pro and Enterprise will have the ability to defer updates.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So I don't know if that means you have to reboot when they want to, but
I mean, so we have just crossed into the territory now. When you buy an operating system, you no longer have control over when that operating system will update itself.
Because it's Microsoft, I feel this is in the best interest of the internet, though. Right? Is the huge number of unpatched machines out on the internet not the source of most of our problems these days?
Yeah, I'm just hearing a lot of quotes from RMS floating around in my head right now about...
Right, and a bunch of other things. Yes, I'm not a big fan of this, but at the same time, I see how it's what we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely a double-sided coin there. That one's I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Microsoft hasn't done updates before that remove functionality and features and disable stuff.
Well,
And
most
so,
of they're not really removing anything too crazy.
no, but like in the past, they've like had updates that broke Windows activation and made computers unusable. When
Right.
they made changes to Windows Genuine Activation, and if I and being able to defer that update meant keeping your
Saved
computer
a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
It's just that's a big
Although
thing.
they've been pretty good about not having too many of those and
Yeah.
pulling them quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll be, if
We'll
I
be
end
watching.
up on Windows 10, I'll have the Pro version. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's,
Although I don't know, I don't see myself staying on Windows that much longer.
yeah. I mean, Windows 10 's supposed to, everybody thinks it's going to be a great release, so it'll probably keep a lot of people.
It's just
but
if I just give up gaming, then I don't really need Windows anymore.
right, or if you just hold on to Windows 7 for a couple more years, you probably
yeah, and by then I'll be old and
yeah. and the few games you want will probably work under FreeBSD.
exactly.
By then. All right, let's talk about this story from the security
Big
ledger.
one here, yes.
Yeah.
The insurance company for Cottage Health, which is one of those health providers that was hacked, a hospital that was hacked, is refusing to pay out on the insurance because of lax security practices and the fact that the data was stored on a server directly accessible from the internet with no encryption. Now, the problem with a lot of these policies is they have very wiggly wording. It's like, take reasonable steps. It's like, well, what's reasonable,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I think it specifically mentions that the data can't be stored directly connected to the internet unless it's encrypted.
Okay, well, I'll take that, I guess.
Yeah. So this might kick a bunch of companies in the butt
Yeah.
to get them to start doing stuff because all of a sudden their risk mitigation from insurance doesn't apply if they don't. But at the same time, I see this as some companies are going to start marketing, meet the minimum requirements for your insurance by buying our software.
Yeah. Alan, this next story, honestly, kind of makes me giggle a little bit.
For 1 sec,
yeah.
somebody in the chat was mentioning, he's imagining angry phone calls to ISPs over bandwidth overage charges due to Windows 10 forced updates.
Ooh.
Windows updates are distributed by CDNs like Akamai, which often have a box at an ISP. So if you're like Comcast or somebody, you probably already have a big box sitting in the the cable company's head end where the copy of Windows Update
Yeah,
lives.
and I'm
so they
sure-
actually download one copy of the Windows Update, and every cable customer gets it from
Like-
that without using any internet bandwidth.
And Windows 10 would be smart enough, I would assume, on a tablet to not auto-update when you're on cellular, right? Because, Windows, I would assume.
So, I tell my phone.
Yeah.
My Google phone's like, yes, I'll be smart. I won't back up your pictures unless you're on
Yeah,
Wi-Fi.
exactly.
So on.
All right, well, this one makes me giggle, and maybe hopefully is not a sign of things to come. The self-parking Volvo plows into a journalist after the owner neglected to pay extra for the feature that stops the car from crashing into people. That's right, it's an extra if you want it to avoid people. Now, I got to play this video, Alan. Do you mind?
The self-parking feature is one feature, but
Yeah.
pedestrian detection is
Yeah.
a separate feature that not everybody buys.
All right, so we're watching this video here. They're driving this Volvo, and it's going to park itself, which parking can be a difficult thing. All right, and now it looks like the car is stopped. Everybody's safe at this point. I don't see any problems. About halfway into the video now. And the car has begun moving forward. Oh, no. Oh,
Hey,
no!
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Oh, gosh!
That was going awfully fast for parking.
Oh, my gosh. I did not expect it to be that violent.
No, why? Like, the self-parking cars are usually quite slow, right? Just like...
Yeah, the thing really...
Boom! Like accelerate. It's like, I hate people.
Jeez.
Sentient cars.
Wow. So yeah, it does not have pedestrian detection. This is sold as a separate package according to the Volvo spokesperson Jonathan Larson.
Yeah, so it'll
Yikes.
self-park, but if you want it to not run people over, that's separate. My question, there was somebody in the car driving, right?
I guess the two men were bruised but are okay, according to the sources that wrote the blog.
Yes,
And
cars nowadays actually have very good stuff about not killing pedestrians.
we'll have a link to that video in the show notes if you're listening and wanted to see that. It's a little startling though, so you could skip it if you need to.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Our next one is actually a Slexi post from some submitter named Alan Jude. Not familiar with it, but it's about journalistic integrity.
Yeah, I got an email from this place called CIOreview.com. And at first I was kind of interested. Subject scale engine shortlisted for the top 20 most promising content delivery networks. And they're like, oh, we're going to feature you in our magazine, blah, 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 blah. However, you need to pay us $3,000 or we're not. It's like,
what?
Really? It's like, well, we've surveyed your organization's points of interest, blah, 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 blah. We do look for an ostensible sponsorship of $3,000. Here's what you'll get. You'll get the right to reprint your page in our magazine. And it's like, what? No. I love the journalistic integrity of, we've picked you to be in our top 20. We'll only publish you in the top 20 if you pay us $3,000.
Yeah, wow. That is...
I went and looked at their website. I thought at first I was mixing it up with one of the actual CIO magazines that's actually printed.
Yeah.
It's a real magazine.
Yeah.
But this just looks like a website made to look almost like that, but you can just tell it's pretty garbagey. And I did some searching on it and found a bunch of other people seeing the same scam, including some people back in 2013 seeing the same scam. Back then it was only $2,000, not $3,000.
They've raised the rate. Alan, watch out if you're using Tor for something dirty, because it looks like Tor connections to hidden services could be easily de-anonymized. What?
Right. Well, because of the way Tor actually has an index of where the hidden services actually are, well, if you stay online really well, you can actually end up getting elected as as one of the nodes that's going to have that list.
Yeah.
Researchers managed to become like 4 of the 6 nodes that hold the list. And with that, we're able to actually watch everybody that was trying to look them up and figure out where everybody was going.
That seems like a big problem.
Yeah. So while Tor is decentralized, there has to be a central index for a bunch of stuff, and it's the weak point at the moment.
Yeah.
But the paper's there, and you can take a look at it. It's quite interesting.
All right. Well, our next post here is a Intel Kernel Guard technology post, instruction using curls scripts to download and install IKGT. What the heck is IKGT?
Yes.
For Debian
Intel Kernel Guard technology.
Oh.
Basically, it's a kernel module that can then talk to
the CPU.
Something that runs, if you go to the overview for the graphic. So this is a thing that's supposed to help protect your machine from exploits and so on, and make your machine more secure and stop somebody from modifying your kernel.
I see.
With a rootkit.
Yeah.
And the install instructions are curl this URL and pipe it into bash and let it just run whatever commands it wants.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's how you install security tools.
Yep.
The hell.
Yep.
But it looks like a fairly interesting technology. It uses the virtualization stuff in your processor, even though this is running on the original host. Basically, it allows you to use the virtualization table, second level translation table stuff, to mark the kernel, the space that your kernel is in memory, as read only, so that your kernel can't be modified once it's running.
Clever.
Possibly this could break that update the kernel without rebooting feature, but I think even in that one, you're actually not overwriting the kernel in place. You're making a new kernel and then switching to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it looks like a cool technology, although the install instructions make me head desk.
All right, I love this idea. This ad for banned food in Russia hides itself when cops walk up.
Yeah, so it's selling Italian food, which is illegal to import in Russia currently, but it has a camera that looks out, and if it sees the insignia or the badge or whatever of various police services and so on, it switches the ad to show like a local movie or something that would be allowed.
That sounds legit. I think I would go for that. What could be the problem? The problem is when I'm watching it, it's too slow. Okay, so here it is from 250 meters away. All right, well, now what is this? All right, so I'm looking for it here. Yeah, okay, this has got to be a joke, right? Okay, so they got people walking up, people walk by, it doesn't do nothing. Cop walks by. Now look, the cop can see it flip. Watch, cop walks up.
If anything, it's going to draw more attention to it.
Yeah, that's why I think this is a gag. It's got to be a gag, right?
I don't think it's a gag. It's just technology that doesn't work very well yet.
Yeah, right. That's very true. Okay, let's talk about an emulator that now runs x86 apps on the Raspberry Pi.
Right, so they've had this emulator for ARM v7, which includes the Pi 2 for a while. But they've just extended it to also be able to work on the original Pi, and as part of that, also made it faster on the Pi 2. So this will let you run unmodified regular x86 apps on your Raspberry Pi and Pi 2.
Cool.
I think there's individual apps, not the whole OS or something, but
yeah.
It does make it possibly very interesting to do some stuff that's not ported to ARM yet.
So Amit and his colleagues say that, guess what? Our security is stuck in the dark ages. The RSA president says this at the keynote last month. A lot of people say the essentials are right, but things are not necessarily as bad as he makes it out to be.
Yeah, things are bad and getting worse, though. And I think he thinks probably not untrue.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because there's so much hype around cyber and attacks and blaming Russia and China all the time. But it does seem the underlying technology is getting to a point where it's old enough that old bugs have worked their way into the system that are biting us over and over again now. Yep. And you just can't deny that we have tons of routers out there with vulnerabilities in people's homes. We've got a lot of machines that aren't getting patched. So, yeah. And as we deploy more systems, there's more of that code sitting out there. So, I guess...
Yep.
Just means how well we manage it, I suppose. There's a good article over at ReadWrite that says that maybe online voting isn't going to be a pipe dream overall. Researchers have devised a system that looks secure. Yeah, sorry. The researchers have devised a system that looks secure, but guess what, Alan? They say it's not very easy to use.
Yeah, so it's a secure voting system. They have the research PDF paper on top of the story here. And with it, neither the voting device nor your computer can actually tell how you voted, although it seems to be kind of hard to use. And looking at the image there, it looks like you have to do some math or something. And
yeah, that's going to be a good one. Well, at least they're working on it, Alan, I guess.
If they come up with the security part, they might be able to then work with a user interface engineer or something to actually make it a little more usable.
Yeah. If you can make Bitcoin usable.
Starting with something secure and then making it usable is probably better than have somebody come up with a nice GUI interface and then try to add security on after the fact. Something we've learned repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. All right, the last link in the roundup this week is a tool to remind you need to be careful. Not to abuse it, but it is an interesting tool. It's a GitHub comment crawler that continuously monitors github.org for mistaken public comments. So it's called GHCC. It enumerates members of the GitHub organization. It looks for their public comments and phrases those comments and parses those comments for keywords and regexes that may contain sensitive information, API keys, SSH keys, etc., etc. Now, to make it easy for you, it's ready to go with a Docker container, so you can get up and going in no time, and then you can run this script, and it will continually watch and create a nice report for you. Look at this, Alan. Look at that.
Yes, so you don't accidentally commit your Amazon EC2 keys to GitHub, which we saw before.
Yep.
Now, interestingly, I guess I have a story about GitHub that got bumped to next week, actually. But it was... a bunch of people, including on large open source projects, had weak SSH keys that people could possibly generate clones for or whatever, and then would be able to commit stuff to GitHub. GitHub has since revoked all of those SSH keys, but it was interesting that people had SSH keys weak enough that they could have been a problem on big open source projects.
Yep. And so it's good to have tools out there. So if you have a project out there, you can audit your own.
But yes, you have to be careful. Don't commit your config files with your database configuration or your API keys and things like that. You have to, make liberal use of that git ignore thing and make sure only the files you want are actually getting pushed out public.
Alan, let's give people a pro tip. We'd like to have you watch live next week. We'll be back live on Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom. You can also join us at jblive.info, which is the audio-only stream. That's great for you commuters. Maybe you're stuck at a desk or in a low-bandwidth situation. You don't have video access. jblive.info. Listen live and hang out in our chat room. Go to irc.geekshed.net and join # Jupiter Broadcasting. Also, don't forget we want your emails. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact and send in your emails to the TechSNAP program. And you can also participate in our subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com. Grab an RSS feed and get the show automatically every single week. Those are right underneath the download links at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And notes and links to everything we talked about today will be with also, I might add, extensive detail listed in our show notes. Just go find episode 218 over at Jupiter Broadcasting, scroll down, and you'll see all of the notes. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the TechSNAP program. We'll see you right back here next week.